So, I just got around to seeing the brand new reboot of The Strangers, which is titled The Strangers Part 1, or Chapter 1, or something like that. Because this is actually a new reimagining of the Strangers universe that's going to take place in three movies that were all shot at the same time, and I think we're getting all three of them within the next year. Like, I think the next one comes out in a few months. So cool. This one was directed by Renny Harlin, and it's essentially a retelling or a reimagining of that original Strangers movie. Strangers, which came out in 2008 and scared the absolute shit out of me when I was a kid. Now, if you don't know what The Strangers is, it's a very simple story about people that are in a house and they get stalked by these strangers. These home invaders who are not just there to hurt the people in the house, but kind of just to fuck with them, to scare them, to freak them out emotionally, psychologically. And the whole point of the movie is the randomness of it all. The fact that you never really get the explanation of why the strangers are there, who they are, and what's actually going on. It's just kind of this haunting scenario that's supposed to kind of signal to the audience that this could happen to you. You could just be hanging out one day and these assholes in masks could come and just fuck with you and then kill you. I think the original movie is an absolute classic. Maybe it's because I just saw it as a kid and it freaked me out then, but I just think it is one of the better slasher films that I've ever seen. It has that horror vibe to it that I love, the style of horror filmmaking where the audience is kind of, they're almost playing kind of like a fourth wall break on the audience. And what I mean by that is that the audience is in the know on information and points of view that the main characters are not in on. And you see this trope in a lot of movies, but it really, really works in the original Strangers. For example, you'll be watching like the main character, the woman in that movie, just hanging out, cooking food, doing whatever, and in the background, you'll see one of the strangers in the house just viewing them, and it's a very nonchalant type shot, something that you don't need a big sound design click to really signal that there's something in the shot the audience needs to see, but it's there, and it gives the audience something to make it feel like the horror is directly pointed at them, not at the character, because the character is not feeling the fear, is not seeing what's happening. So that's what I really like about that movie. Maybe I should start talking about the movie that I'm reviewing. That would probably work. We're like 3 minutes into this video. So The Stranger Chapter 1 has a similar setup. You have this boyfriend and girlfriend, this couple that are on this trip, and they stop in this lodging sort of Airbnb house in the middle of fucking butt-fuck nowhere. And as they're staying in this place, they start getting stalked by the strangers. And that's pretty much the whole plot of this movie. Now, this movie does put a little bit more effort into like a weird setup. You're introduced earlier in the movie to this very kind of like isolated town in Oregon. There's only like 400 people in the town, and the people in this town are very weird. They're, you know, they don't really treat our main characters. They treat our main characters very strangely, like they're clearly not used to outsiders, and they set this weird vibe that kind of leaves up to the audience this little bit of imagination of maybe this town is involved in what's about to happen to them. But regardless, none of that ends up being that important. What ends up being important is this cabin in the woods scenario. This cabin in the woods which these characters are staying at, which, by the way, the set of this movie looked very, very familiar to Knock at the Cabin, that M. Night Shyamalan film from a year ago. I wonder if they used the same set. I don't know, to me at least it just looks similar. But this location in and of itself works as a horror set piece in a slasher film, a very simple slasher film. And the main characters of this movie also, I think, work as main characters in a slasher film. At least Madeline Pesch's character, I think she is very, very talented. She's a very underrated actress who is also gorgeous. I have a big crush on her, I'm not gonna lie. But she's great in this movie. I don't think the writing does her a lot of justice. They're not given a lot to work with dialogue here, but she kind of sells this, when she has to be terrified, she sells the terrifiedness of this character, but she also kind of sells this a caring nature that she has for her boyfriend or husband or whatever he is. Now, the boyfriend, Ryan, not as good. Least favorite character in the movie. I'll get into it more in a second. But the whole setup of these two being at the cabin, and when the strangers come in and you start getting to the stuff that you're here to see the movie for, it works well enough. So what about the strangers? How are they? Well, it's the same kind of setup as the original movie. You have these three strangers. You have the big, gigantic dude with a bag over his head. You have the doll face, then you have another, like, smaller one, and they're all exactly how you would imagine them. They're creepy, they're weird, and they are intimidating. And I think a lot of the scares, some of the setups are very simple and very effective. Like, there's a moment where the big bad guy is breaking down a door with the axe, and then he just stares through the door. Like, shit like that gets to me. There's another great shot where she's playing the piano at one point, and you could see through the mirror. You could see some shit. You could see one of the strangers, and, like, stuff like that I fucking love. Then there's other really goofy scares that don't really work. Some stuff that is just so over the top and unrealistic. It kind of takes away from what works about The Strangers, which is its groundedness and the fact that it feels real. There are some things that feel not so real. But I think for the most part, the Strangers are intimidating. They work as this horror group, you know, maybe not as well as the original movie, but I think they call back enough to that original movie for this to work for newer audiences. If you're somebody who's seen the original and you're expecting something to elevate that kind of content, you're not going to get that. You're getting something that's going to be worse than that. But if you're somebody who's never seen the original, I could definitely see how this could work and be extremely effective on like a first watch. There are some decent jump scares in here if you're a big jump scare person. I'm not, but there's one that did really get me. It was really effective, and I'm not going to spoil any more of that, but yeah, there's one good one in this movie. And this movie builds, and it doesn't really ever go anywhere surprising. It kind of follows the beats that you're expecting in this movie, especially if you're assuming it's a remake of the original. It sort of follows beat for beat what that movie kind of did. And then you get to the ending, and it kind of follows beat for beat what you would expect. And then they give you a little bit of a setup, a little bit of an opening for part 2, which comes out in a few months, right? It gives you a little bit of a cliffhanger to a part 2 that I'm actually more interested in, because now that we've gotten past the recreating the original and rebooting the original and kind of doing the beat-for-beat remake, now I'm interested to see what do you do next, because we don't really know what a sequel to The Strangers looks like. The only thing we had ever gotten was that movie Strangers Prey at Night, which was like a complete reimagining of the Strangers story. It was like a real over-the-top slasher film. I believe it took place in like the 80s, and it was just absolute bonkers, and that I love that movie. Not a lot of people talk about it. But I'm very interested to see what a sequel to this will look like, a follow-up to this. Obviously, we're going to be, you know, bringing back some of the characters, and we'll see what happens, but I'm more intrigued than that than I am intrigued in going back and rewatching this, because at the end of the day, this is a very standard sort of remake that doesn't really tread new water, doesn't really do anything that new, or that interesting, to be honest. Now let's get to Ryan. Ryan is the worst character in this fucking movie. Because every horror movie, of course, you have the tropes of horror films. You have dumb characters. You have characters who do really dumb things, and those dumb things end up leading to them getting killed. In some movies that, you know, don't take themselves too seriously, they make a comedic aspect of those characters. In other movies, it becomes comedic for the wrong reasons because it takes itself way too seriously. This is one of those movies. This is a character that just makes wrong decision after wrong decision after wrong decision, and you just can't help but laugh at some points, and then it just gets to the point of absolute ridiculousness because you get to a moment where you're like, you know, as somebody who enjoys kind of like the psychological aspects of horror movies, trying to wonder what characters would actually do in these scenarios, what human beings would do. This character just kind of goes against, I think, the human instinct and things that we would do to survive. Like, I'm not gonna go too far into it because I don't want to spoil this, even though, like, I'm sure nobody really gives a shit if this movie's spoiled, but there are things that this character does that it's like, wow, if he just does the obvious thing here, they will get out of this situation. And then he doesn't do it. And there's like multiple instances of this that are just so ridiculous. And because of that, it makes this character so unlikable. There's a moment in this movie, and I hate to be like the chivalrous Sigma male, so I'm gonna like try not to do that, but I found it so hilarious how like for a lot of this movie, this character's trying to like, I'm gonna protect you, I'll protect us, I'll get us out of this. And then there's a moment where they're like stuck in a room, and they finally like creep out of the room, and they're trying to figure out where the strangers are, and she, the girl, goes first, and she's leading the charge, and he's behind her, like, come on, man. How are you supposed to like a male character that's supposed to be the strong protector in this film, and you make him as unlikable as possible by making him a bitch, but like unintentionally a bitch, because I don't think that's what the writers were intending here, but that's what it came off as. Also, a funny thing about The Strangers, I don't know who was playing the people under the mask, like I have no idea, but there are, I had a feeling at one point, there was a moment where I was like, no, that can't be him. And what I mean is there's a scene where like the big guy is like running after them, like he's chasing them. And the way that the big guy moves in this scene and kind of the whole movie, kind of does one of these like, kind of like the, you know, these like runs. Oh, the old person run, like the Joe Biden, you know? But it reminded me of another movie that I've seen. Remember this scene? Yeah, this. I was like, oh my god, is fucking Robert De Niro the stranger? No, probably not. But that would be, God, if they could pull that off, that would be the greatest thing in cinema history. So maybe, but we'll see in Chapter 2. I don't know, what else, what was I talking about? A score, let's score this thing. I'll give The Stranger Chapter 1, I'll give it a 2.5 out of 5. I don't know, I enjoyed it. It was fun, it was short, it's a retread of a much, much better movie. It doesn't offer anything new. It's probably just a worse version of the original movie. If you're somebody who's never seen it, you'll probably sit down, watch this, enjoy it. If you're somebody who's just trying to go see a fun slasher horror movie, this is probably something that's going to be a general audience pleaser, if I had to guess. But I don't know, there's nothing really new here, so yeah, 2.5. But let me know what you guys thought of this movie. Have you guys seen The Stranger, the original one, at least? What do you guys think? That movie fucked me up as a kid. It used to freak me the hell out. What do you guys think of this movie? Let me know down below. Please make sure to like, subscribe, turn on notifications. I'll see you guys in the next one.